Hey, everybody, welcome. I'm Natalie, and this is Scientology Life After a Cult. I am so excited today. I have been dying to talk to somebody in the Jehovah's Witness space, and I found that somebody on this beautiful space called YouTube. And he is going to join, and we were going to ask questions about the Jehovah's Witnesses, compare what his experience is like to mine in Scientology. And if you have any questions or comments, put question or comment in front of it, and then we'll try and get to as many of those as we can. Yeah, I'm excited, you guys. We've been talking about this all week. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Moose on the Loose, I see you. I'm glad you're here. Aloha to all the members here. Thank you to the moderators, and welcome everybody in the live chat. Without further ado, I'd like you all to meet Jake from AltWorldly. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me on, Natalie.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we were able to do this. I came across one of your videos, and which led me down a rabbit hole, and I'm like, oh, I have found my former Jehovah's Witness.
Yes, the token ex-JW. Love it.
That's right. Then I can be your token ex-Scientologist.
Perfect.
Now, I want to share with people first. Let me pull up something here. I want to show them your channel because you guys, I know you're all going to have questions. This is where you can find Jake at AltWorldly. The mods will throw his link up a few times as we go along in the chat. I've got it down in the description of this video, but you can see it here. Go check them out. I think we're all going to learn a ton about the Jehovah's Witnesses and what that whole experience was like. Let's see. And Nancy, if you see any questions, if you could just star those for me, that'd be super awesome. All right. So, oh my gosh, I have so many questions for you. The first one was kind of like what basically, what would be like the elevator speech on what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe?
Yeah. So Jehovah's Witnesses are a high control, high demand Christian doomsday group. They believe that the last days that Jesus talked about in the Bible began in 1914 and that Armageddon is coming soon. So they are out there preaching door to door to try and bring people into the group because Jehovah's Witnesses are the one true religion on earth. They were chosen by God to preach this message of the coming, not just Armageddon, but the restoration of the earth after Armageddon. But you got to be a Jehovah's Witness to survive. So
interesting.
That's kind of the basic thing. Yeah.
What happened in 1914 that kicked this off? Was that when the religion started, or did something happen that made them go, okay, we are definitely in end of days?
So it's tricky. The group, when they first began, were just known as Bible students. They were this movement that started, and sorry if my camera gets blurry sometimes, my focus thing gets messed up. It's not you, it's me. So Charles Taze Russell, in the 1800s started this group, and there were a lot of similar Adventist religions around the same time. The Seventh-day Adventists started, Latter-day Saints or Mormons started around this time, and Jehovah's Witness started around this time, and they were all very concerned with this idea of Jesus's reign in heaven coming to an end and being able to predict when the end of the world would come based on prophecies in the Bible. So like in Daniel's prophecy, there's these dream prophecies he gives with numbers and math, and this will happen for so many days. And there's prophecies like that in Ezekiel and Revelation. And so William Miller was an early guy who was like, if you add all these numbers up, we can figure out the end of the world. And so Charles Taze Russell was one of these guys and basically took a lot of William Miller's prophecies and was like, I think, well, he didn't say I think, he said I know, and it is proof from the scriptures, and here's all of the charts and math and everything, that the end of all things is going to happen in 1914. So, like, Jehovah's Witnesses started as a group called the Bible Students, who believed that the end of the world was going to come in 1914. And then that didn't happen. So they pivoted and said that Jesus started ruling invisibly in heaven in 1914. And that's more or less been the doctrine ever since. Like, they're like, because World War One happened in 1914, they're like, well, clearly we predicted something right
Yeah.
because a thing happened that was crazy. It wasn't the actual end of the world. So now they just say, Jesus started ruling invisibly in 1914, which is a great thing to claim because you can't check and see if they're right. And they've maintained that ever since. But yeah, it's another example of flip-flopping and how the organization, like when they get something wrong, they'll just kind of incorporate it into their history.
Yeah. Do they have, so when you become a Jehovah's Witness, what is the sell then? Like if they believe that we are in the end of days and have been since 1914, what is the call to action to join the church, to accept Jesus? What is like the call to action? Is it just, I mean, do people, I mean, are they just gathering and, I mean, just waiting for the end? Like what would be the
It's
steps?
that's a great question because it's like I remember hearing Leah Remini once say, I think, like, nobody joined Scientology because they want to serve Xenu or whatever and be in the Sea Org. Like, they join because they think they're serving the world or they're saving the world.
Mhm.
That's the same thing with Jehovah's Witnesses. Is like true Christians, like true Christians. When they understand the Bible, they understand that Jesus gave a proclamation to preach.
Mhm.
And Jesus did talk about that in the Bible, like, go therefore and make disciples of all the tribes and people of the nations. I don't know. I forget the Bible. But, Jesus did go on a preaching tour and commanded people to preach. So it's easy to, like, if somebody doesn't know a lot about the Bible or is in a vulnerable place in their life, see, like, look, this is what Jesus' message is. This is what we're supposed to be doing. And so the part of the pitch for Jehovah's Witnesses is like, we have the correct understanding of the Bible. It gives you something to do in your life, which is the most important thing on earth that you possibly can do. Like, all human governments have failed. Clearly, they would say, pointing to chaos around the world. Like, look at all the tumult around the earth, and human governments can't get their act together. Well, the Bible
Do they have
prophesied that
do
would
they have
happen.
a mistrust of the government? Would you say?
Yes, extreme mistrust of all institutions. Like, they will say, and they believe that, like, you should follow the laws and be like a good citizen up until the point where it conflicts with being a servant of Jehovah, and then scriptural law would take precedent over man's law, Caesar's law,
That's
as they would
scary.
call it.
That's
Right. So I think, like, it appeals to that kind of disaffected person who, correctly sees that there's a lot of corruption in the world,
Mhm.
but is kind of in this doomery space of like, we're all screwed and nothing matters. And Jehovah's Witnesses are like, well, you're right. Mankind is doomed to destruction. They are incapable of solving their existential problems. And that's why God has promised that he's going to wipe away this ineffective rule of mankind and replace it with a perfect godly government, a theocracy ruled from heaven by God and a few select people who will go to heaven, which we could talk about. I saw some people in chat asking about the heaven part of it. But the earth itself, like our earth that you and I live on, will be restored to a paradise. It'll be a perfect earth, and humans will take part in rebuilding that earth. It will be like, we'll build it to be like the Garden of Eden was in the Genesis account, where it's just perfect and everyone lives forever. And so, like, that's the hope for the future that witnesses are selling people. And it's sort of like there's a hope for the future. There's something to look forward to. All of the stuff that sucks about your life, you're right, and it will be over soon. And all you have to do
So
is
when
join
there's
us.
the
Yeah.
complete end of is it a complete end of the world that they're looking at? Or when they say humans will be around then to live in this perfect paradise, would that include people who are already here who are Jehovah's Witnesses? Or is this
Yes. Yeah. So, like, And I apologize because I feel like I'm not explaining things super well. So if you ever need me to stop and like ask a follow-up question, please do.
Oh, totally. Doing great.
Because I do want to be your Jehovah's Witness. I want to be the go-to person. But you know how it is. Like I'm describing something that I was in for my entire life. So it's like, okay, wait, how to make this normal for a second. Sorry, what did you ask me? You asked
if so with the whole end of the world,
end of the world thing.
Is it something that they would still have their physical bodies, like people who happen to be alive when it happens? Like if the end of the world happens this afternoon and Jehovah's Witnesses are so they won't perish in the end of the world?
Correct. They will be safe. They will be. I wonder if I can find a picture and like maybe email it to you and you can put it on screen because there's some great.
Like Mark safe from the zombie apocalypse, or Mark.
That's
safe.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. So maybe not literally exactly, but that's basically it. Like, so if the end came tomorrow, right? Which. It's kind of confusing. All right, one thing about Jehovah's Witnesses is they actually have a pretty specific timeline of how they think the end of the world is going to come. So they're very much into interpreting modern world events and associating it with Bible prophecy.
And who decides that within the Jehovah's Witnesses? Like, is there a main leader? In Scientology, the cult leader is David Miscavige, and his word is final, and he rules with an iron fist. What would be the equivalent? Do you have a David Miscavige in the Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yeah, we've got like 10 to 13 David Miscaviges at any given time. They're called the governing body. And so basically, instead of having one leader, there's a group of leaders, basically a board of directors. There's not a set amount that there has to be, but usually there's around like 10 or so. And they're generally guys who are like in their 50s or older. They work their way up the hierarchy at world headquarters, which we can talk about later. And yeah, basically their job is to interpret the Bible and canonize certain interpretations of scripture, put that into the publications that Jehovah's Witnesses study and then make that doctrine. So they're the ones who are making those rules. They're the equivalent of the of the human cult leader who's making all these decisions, and then laundering it in terms of like we are speaking on behalf of Jesus and God and all that.
Well, does that mean in ways that they could potentially rewrite scripture in a way, being that it's open for interpretation? In Scientology, there's no interpretation. There's L. Ron Hubbard says this is what it is. Now, there is, of course, human interpretation, but their push on perfection and following L. Ron Hubbard to the letter and having things be consistent from organization to organization is very, very strong. Like, we wouldn't be able to, when I was in Scientology, read L. Ron Hubbard and go, well, I think it means this. It's like
that's right. No, you're totally right. So that would be totally frowned upon. Everybody has to be on the same page, and that's how cults work. Like there has to be unity. You have to agree with their interpretation of scripture. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses will say that all their beliefs are based on the Bible, but they're not. They're all based on the Watchtower, which is the magazine that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the entity publishing company behind Jehovah's Witnesses, that's how that's how doctrine is made. It is put in writing or in a video on the Jehovah's Witness website. It is some kind of official word from the Jehovah's Witness higher ups. So they can make scriptures say whatever they want. There are scriptures in the Bible that say you should stone adulteresses to death. Like they don't say that you have to do that, right? That's like, well, no, that's part of the Mosaic law. That was part of the Old Testament. We don't do that anymore. But they do say that you're not allowed to accept blood transfusions, which is crazy and obviously not in the Bible at all. But they will just find a scripture that mentions not eating blood and retrofit that and say that that's the teaching. So they can, the Bible is so vague and interpretive that they can just say that any scripture means anything. They're like what I was kind of mentioning earlier with them having a timetable in terms of when the end is going to come. Like they believe that when the book of Daniel in the Bible talks about this prophesied king of the north, that king of the north is actually Russia, and the king of the South is the United States. Like, they're kind of telling people, like, okay, well, yes, the Bible says this, but it means this. And so basically, like, for your purposes, you just have to imagine, like, the Watchtower is Dianetics. And, like, they're citing their source, which is the Bible, but, like, you have to go by what the Watchtower says. Like, the governing body's interpretation of scripture is the correct interpretation. And they would not say that it's an interpretation at all. They would say, we found what this means. This is what the Bible means, and it's the truth.
How do are the people who run the Jehovah's Witnesses, this 11, this 12, are they elected? How do they rise to power in that way?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some of it's a little vague, but because of court cases and stuff that have happened where a governing body member was essentially deposed and had to stand on a witness stand and answer questions, we've got some knowledge of how this works. The Australian Royal Commission, if people want to look that up. But basically, the way it works is there's a world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses called Bethel. Bethel, it means house of God in Hebrew, I think. Maybe Greek. I'm realizing I don't actually know. But Bethel means house of God, and so they've got this world headquarters where they centralize their operations in the United States. There are a few main corporate buildings that they have that serve different functions, but governing body members are just workers. They might have been somebody who started cleaning the toilets, at Bethel, and then they get promoted to the printing department, and then they're there for 10 years, and then they work in the writing department. So then they're actually the ones putting the words into the magazines, and then they get, elevated to the next department up. It's a very boring corporate structure, but eventually, once you kind of have been in the mix, and you're aware of all the skeletons in the group's closet, and you're not going to defect, basically, you're kind of seen as safe to move up to the governing body.
How do they, so being that this governing body, do they have a certain amount of time that they can be on that governing body, or they're just there till they die?
Yeah, they're there till they die, or until you get removed, and they never tell us why. But it's essentially like being picked to be a Supreme Court justice, in that it's a lifetime appointment. If I can kind of back up for a second, I just kind of want to close the loop on the Armageddon thing, which I realized I never really finished explaining earlier, because I think that's important, right? Like, the sales pitch for Jehovah's Witnesses is that it's the one true religion. They have the right understanding of the Bible, and the Bible has the answer to everything that you need in life, from family happiness to just like inner peace, living a healthy life. And so there are people who join the Witnesses for all kinds of reasons. If they lost a loved one in death, and they're excited about the paradise, the earthly paradise, because part of that within Jehovah's Witness beliefs is that everybody who ever died is resurrected to this paradise on earth and given a second chance to serve God faithfully.
But are so, like, there people who are Jehovah's Witnesses would be resurrected?
No, that's kind of the tricky thing, is like there's a resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous. So, like, to get into how the end and stuff works, like, most people join Jehovah's Witnesses because they like the kind of base promises at the door, which is that there's a hope for the future. You'll get to see your dead loved ones again, stuff like that. You might imagine in how Scientology, like, it might be pitched to somebody as this is just kind of a way to find like centeredness and, kind of help clear your head so you're better at being an executive or an actor or whatever your professional life is, or just a human being or a parent. That same thing's happening for Jehovah's Witnesses. And then you get involved and you find out that it's much more complicated, But the end of the thing, the end of the world, is like, it couldn't technically come tomorrow because there's all these steps that have to happen, but you're always one day away from the thing that might bring Armageddon, right? Like, because there's all these signs of the times. So there's always little breadcrumbs that you're latching onto. But
how do you take an? Sorry to interject, but
oh no, you're fine.
How I just try and think about, like, put myself in those shoes, and if I believe that the world could end any day, like, that sounds incredibly anxiety inducing. And like
Yes.
it make decisions in life that may not be that great if you think that the world is going to end. And I mean, is there any of that?
Oh yes, I mean that's the entire structure of how you're kept in. Like on one hand, you feel like you have the truth, so you have all of the answers, and you're in this protected group that's going to survive Armageddon. On the other hand, if you mess up, you could be cast out into the world and be one of those who's destroyed in Armageddon. So on one hand, like you're supposed to feel really good because you are living the best way of life and you have found the one true religion. You're making God happy, but are you? Because you got to constantly be questioning yourself. Are you doing enough work for the group? Because that's how your spirituality is measured, basically. Like how much are you doing for the organization?
Very
Um,
similar to Scientology in those ways.
yes.
You were born
So
into it?
I was, yes. Sorry, I keep feeling like I'm
Sorry, I keep I have so many
Oh
questions.
no, it's like
Get
I
it.
want to I feel bad because I have ADHD and so I know I jump around. So I feel like I'm just doing a bad job of explaining
No,
things succinctly.
like you're doing a really good job. I
Oh
just
good, okay, okay. I
questions.
also got new glasses today and so I'm distracted and like things are a little, you know what I'm saying? Like
I
everything's a little
totally
weird. Like oh my god, my glasses.
yeah.
Okay.
No, we're all
So
good. We're all like aloha and chill over here.
aloha and show. Okay, good. So the Armageddon thing, like, yes, if it came tomorrow, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, in good standing, like you're a good Jehovah's Witness, then you will survive. You might even see angels surrounding you as other angelic bodies are like attacking tanks and military forces trying to destroy God's people and God's heavenly armies. You will be safe. And so, like, yeah, people who are alive right now, just like Russell's original band of Bible students, think that they are going to live and see the end of this stuff. Um, but that just keeps on not happening. And that's why the
Yeah.
organization has now been around for, what, 150 years or so, and the end still hasn't come. And so that's kind of the tricky situation that they are in, is and they haven't really had any specific doomsday predictions for the past 25 years or so. Like really after the year 2000 happened, they've been very vague and just will keep saying that it's going to happen soon. And so like that's kind of the tricky thing about being a Jehovah's Witness is it's literally the sunk cost fallacy, right? People like my grandparents who have been witnesses for 70 years, they've dedicated 70 years of their time, but they're told that just when you think all hope is lost, that's when the end's going to come. So if you're getting that urge to leave because you think you've wasted your life in Jehovah's Witnesses, well, that's exactly when the end's going to come. So you
Oh my
can't, right?
That
Yeah.
was gonna be some of my next questions, like, how do they control you? Because in Scientology, we were very controlled with threats of disconnection. If you leave
Yes.
Scientology and you have friends or family in, they will disconnect from you. They're you cannot color outside the lines in Scientology. It's you cannot
Right.
follow what L. Ron Hubbard said to the letter to maintain staying in good standing within Scientology so you can still talk to your friends and family. So, whoa, they threaten you with that.
Oh yeah, like they've got a lot of money, so they make little movies that essentially, are biblical reenactments of them taking a Bible story,
Mhm.
recalibrating it to fit modern Jehovah's Witness doctrine, and making this big production a cautionary tale on the dangers of leaving Jehovah's Witnesses. Um, so that's like where a lot of the money goes too. It's just to creating propaganda to keep people scared, to keep them in. Oh, so in terms of how you're controlled, I guess I can fold this into like my own upbringing, right? Because I was born into the religion,
Yeah,
and
I would love to hear you're born into it. What's the day-to-day life like and what happened that you left?
yeah. So from what I understand, and maybe I'll ask some questions myself, but like I understand that like when you're a Scientologist, you've got quite a lot of like meetings and Scientology stuff that you're doing throughout the week, right? Like
Yeah, you have
even
to.
if you're a kid.
Yep, there are Scientology courses that you attend or doing what's called Scientology auditing. Um,
Right.
but there's an expectation that you're pretty much there every day, or at least, like, whoops, that almost fell over, like about a minimum of like 2.5 hours a day if you're on course. If you're a regular person who's not on staff, that it's a big time suck.
Yeah, and that is what youth was like. So, my parents were great. I love my parents still. They do shun me now, which we can get to, but they were good parents, and they understood that it can be a little weird being a Jehovah's Witness because you're different from other people at school. But like, yeah, on one hand, it was normal because I went to public school and, watched most movies that other people were allowed to, but like I wasn't allowed to watch Harry Potter because that was demonic.
The line on what you can or cannot watch.
There is some room for conscience, your own personal conscience, but the group will try and tell you to do something without telling you. So like you're never going to find, don't read Harry Potter in the Watchtower, but what you will find is them talking about how awful it is that Satan's world today glorifies movies and books that have witches and wizards and trying to smuggle this witchcraft and devilry into pop culture. Like, so they'll make it pretty clear what they think you shouldn't be watching and engaging in. And so most witnesses just are kind of private about what they feel comfortable watching because they don't want to offend people. Or if they're they don't want to like offend or stumble other people in the congregation. So like I was allowed to watch Star Wars because my parents, they liked Star Wars, but I had friends who weren't allowed to. So I just didn't really talk about it.
You just didn't tell them that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So like there's some wiggle room where, you might be able to do certain things that other witnesses aren't allowed to do because like there's a level of individual choice, I guess, in terms of how involved you are. But like, so when I was at school, I liked art. I liked doing art and doing performing and things, but I couldn't have done any extra curricular activities at school because that would have been spending too much time in Satan's world. That could have been better spent, in the ministry or doing theocratic things.
Are any activities? I mean, was there a limit? Like, would you be allowed to play a sport, or is that too much?
Definitely not allowed to play a sport.
Why? And I think why is that? What makes sports and other activities part of the devil's world?
Yeah, it's about time. It's about monopolizing your time, really. Like within the group, what they would say is they would cite a scripture that says bad association spoils useful habits. That's what their translation of the Bible says. And it's basically just a simple principle that if you spend too much time with people who don't serve Jehovah, who are not friends with Jehovah, to use their language, that's going to rub off on you, and it's going to instill you with worldly qualities, or at the very least, it will take up your time that you could be using preaching and, saving people from this impending Armageddon. Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's not quite that that the leadership goes up on stage and says, you are not allowed to play after school sports because if you do that, you're going to die. Like, they're not going to say it like that. Yeah. What they will say is true Christians, if they really take what Jehovah says seriously and God's warnings from the Bible, they would want to be very cautious before enrolling their child in extracurricular activities that would put their kids in closer contact with non-witnesses, and that would take them away from congregation meetings and ministry, and that could really stumble other people in the car. They'll kind of just like do this browbeating, shame language to just make it very clear that they think it would be bad and that you should think it's bad, and that if anybody's kid is enrolled in an after-school program, you should make them feel bad. And so
it's a lot of guilt and shaming, it sounds like, to control.
Yes, it's weaponizing guilt and shame. Yeah. And so that's a lot of what it's like, like I had good times, I guess, in terms of like sometimes the church will get togethers and functions were fun, and I had friends that I got along with. But then I think the thing that is hard to articulate to people, and is just what a weight it is on you all the time. Like what you were saying, the level of anxiety that you have all the time, you don't even know that you have it. You think that it's just sensible because from your point of view, you are living in a doomed, dying world where Satan is constantly trying to trick you and to get you to leave Jehovah's Witnesses. Like that is just your reality. And so leaving, I'm still blown away by just how much time I have and how much less stress I have, even
Oh
though,
my God, yes, I totally
you
get it.
know, I'm a neurotic person. I am still anxious. Like I still take my medicine that I have to take, but it is still
So
like,
they allow you to take medicine in the Jehovah's Witnesses.
yes, they do. They do. They don't really have rules about medicine. It is really specifically only the blood thing. But it's
Okay.
just a big deal because it can kill you if you need a blood transfusion and don't get it.
Yeah. What happens when you were growing up if you watched a movie you shouldn't have, or you stepped out of pocket somehow and you
Mm.
get in trouble? In Scientology, people report their family members to Scientology by writing written reports called knowledge reports. And then that family member goes in for reprogramming, which we know now that that's what it is. Was there any type of snitch culture? What would have happened to you as a child if you broke the rules?
Oh yes, huge snitch culture. And that what would have happened is it wouldn't have to be in writing. But yeah, you would go to the elders of the congregation. Scientology and Jehovah's Witnesses are like very, very structured, like a corporation. You know, like it's really rigid. Witnesses are the same. Where like every if you're driving down the street and you see a Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses, like that's a church, right? Like most people would call that a church. Witnesses call it a Kingdom Hall just because they feel that the word church has been tainted by false Christians, so they just don't like calling it a church. But that's a church, right? And so every church, every Kingdom Hall has a few elders, and those are basically the people who take the lead of that particular church. And they are getting directions on how to do that from the branch, right? And so there's a branch that then answers to the governing body. And so all around the world, there are kingdom halls that then answer to a branch that answer to the governing body. So it's all like this rigid hierarchy thing. And everybody, like elders, are constantly getting policy letters and manuals from the branch on what things are allowed and how to handle certain types of sins. You know, is this a disfellowshipping or shunning offense or no?
What is disfellowshipping? Is that the equivalent? So we have you get if you are excommunicated, and in Scientology they don't even use the word excommunicated unless you're speaking to outsiders. It's you get declared a suppressive person, and they issue it on this goldenrod yellow paper and send it to Scientology organizations everywhere to be like, this person is a suppressive person for these reasons. Is
Yeah.
this kind of the same thing?
Yeah, it is the same thing. And I like what you said in terms of like it would be different to discuss it with an outsider, like there would be different language for it because that's the same thing. So disfellowshipping is what Jehovah's Witnesses called excommunication until probably 6 months ago, and they changed it to just removing or removal. And they did this basically because courts like Norway defunded them, stripped Jehovah's Witnesses of their official religious status because they determined shunning disfellowshipping to be an abuse of human rights because
shunning, well, disfellowshipping would be the equivalent to like being declared a suppressive person.
yes. And so
same as disconnection in my
so
world.
basically
What does shunning look like?
So yeah, I guess what I was trying to describe is like they would call it like within the group, they would call it like being removed from the congregation. They used to call it disfellowshipping. So that is like the action that was taken was removing. So like for me, I was disfellowshipped, or I guess now they would say removed for apostasy. An apostate is somebody who like speaks out against the organization, like criticizes the organization. And so that really got me declared as like a danger. So I was shunned like really fast. But
Yeah.
anybody
how old were you when that happened? How old were you?
I was I think I was 29.
Okay.
And yeah, so like anybody who is announced as being disfellowshipped or removed,
Hmm.
like the congregation gets the same announcement regardless of what it is, and they don't say what the sin is. So like what happened with me, I'm trying to think of like a basic way of describing like just how it works for everybody. But basically, because there's all kinds of things you can get in trouble for, and most people aren't going to get in trouble for apostasy. They will get in trouble for things like, you know, having sex with their boyfriend or girlfriend, or getting handsy, you know, when they're not supposed to, or watching pornography, something like that. Drunkenness, public displays of drunkenness, and so somebody will rat on you, or you'll confess to the elders. So either somebody will tell on you, and the elders will come to you like, "Hey, we've been informed of such
Yeah.
and such. We'd like to invite you to a judicial committee, or a committee of elders." And
Sounds like we have a committee of evidence or a court of ethics. It's like a hearing at
yes,
Scientology. What would be some of the punishments that someone like well actually let's stick with your story. If you were being critical of the Jehovah's Witnesses, you had left that yourself or in your heart, and then did you start speaking out on YouTube? Like where were you doing the doing?
yeah. So like what happened to me, is I just kind of slowly realized, we can get into why I guess later, but I kind of slowly was realizing like I'm not connecting with this anymore. I feel like something's wrong. I feel like this might be a cult, but I'm afraid to look, and that is also confirming to me that it's a cult. Blah, blah, blah. And so like you
Are
just
you
exist
allowed?
in a
Are you allowed to look at things when you're in the JWs that are critical of JWs, or are there rules?
no. No, you were told very clearly that that is like spiritual poison and that is a trap from Satan. Like my parents literally think that I am an agent of Satan because that is how ex members criticizing the group are spoken of.
Mhm.
But yeah, but so anyway, like I posted anonymously, like I just would do voiceover videos, not show my face. Eventually, though, I did show my face. I was like, you know what? I need to know if I'm really gonna get be shunned by my family, like, because I'm still married, thankfully, to the same partner. So it did not end my marriage, but I kind of felt like I needed to know if it would.
So your
I
husband
needed.
left with you.
She was like a little bit behind, like maybe like a year or two behind, but yes, yeah.
Oh,
Now we're both
but
out.
she could stay married to you.
Yeah, yeah. We can talk about that too,
Mhm.
but basically I felt like I needed to know like, well, maybe my family's different, maybe they won't shun me, right? So
Mm.
I showed my face on YouTube. I didn't send it to any witnesses, you know, I just posted it on my channel that I had, and it got found by the elders the next day because
Whoa.
Watchtower does monitor for apostates, which we could
Yeah.
talk about when we get to like how they come after ex members. And so, yeah, very quickly, I got a call from the elders of my congregation saying that this video had been found and they needed to set up a judicial committee. Now, as a result of this Norway ruling, they also changed judicial committee to committee of elders. They're just changing wording slightly to try and like get around the law, but they're not
They're
changing.
rebranding. Scientology does the same thing. We don't have a rehabilitation project force anymore. They just
Right? Yes, like
call it something else.
yeah, they just exactly. So witnesses are doing that exact same thing. They just call it something else. And so yeah, I got elders called me and they said we're going to form a committee. We got to sit with you. And so I met with them probably 3 times. This was during COVID, so we did it over Zoom. But it also made it easy to record on my end. So a couple of those meetings you can see on my channel or listen to. And it was, but in normal times, it would be in person. And you would go probably to the Kingdom Hall and you would sit in this back conference room type area. And
Mhm.
there would be 3 elders there grilling you and essentially asking you a bunch of questions, which, if your sin was sexual in nature, it would be incredibly personal, inappropriate, like disturbing questions. Um, and
They want to know
they,
details because it kind of sounds like in
yes,
Scientology that we had what's called security checking, where you would be on an e-meter where you hold the can and then you were basically interrogated. it sounds like they did the same thing, but they would do it in a group where they would interrogate you and ask you for the gory details about whatever sex
Yes,
you did. And you'd
that's
have
what it's like. Yeah, it's three men
yeah.
wearing suits doing that in a closed door room
Even if
with
it's
you. There's
a woman who's going before the judicial committee or whatever it is.
yeah, yep.
Oh,
And so I cut this out of a video that I was working on because it ended up being like a lighthearted video. And this was such a dark detail. But I'll tell you, if you don't mind me telling you a dark detail and bumming out your viewers. Like
we'll
I just
out and we'll bring it right back up.
so like before I had gotten Disfellowship, I was a good Jehovah's Witness. I really didn't break the rules except for maybe once with a girlfriend of mine, right? And so we got in trouble. My conscience was so bad. I was driving away from the scene of the crime. We basically just got a little handsy. We were dating, made out in the back of my car, and kind of did some awkward Jehovah's Witness heavy petting, I guess you would call it. And so I felt bad. I was like, oh my God, I've sinned. And so I called an elder friend of mine and we set up a meeting. And so, like, in this meeting, which I think it was a little unorthodox because me and my girlfriend were like sat next to each other and they were asking both of us at the same time. But they asked me, like, so did your fingers penetrate her? How far? Like, did she
Whoa.
climax?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Are
Like
they
were asking
down?
Yeah, they were writing down like a little notepad.
Let me ask this. So in Scientology, the belief, the justification behind getting the exact details of any type of sin, or in Scientology, it's called an overt, is L. Ron Hubbard says you have to get the exact time, place, everything of the event in order for it to, he called it as is, and go away. The elders there asking very specific details. What was their justification for being so detailed? You're not supposed to get together with your friends and talk about what you did with your fingers or anything like that. But
that is such a good point. Wow, I never thought about that, but you are so right. If you got together with other Jehovah's Witnesses and talked like that, you would be in such trouble. But that's how the elders talk. Oh, I love that you said that. That's great.
Pervs.
Yeah, well, it is. It's really perverted, and like that was really striking to me. Like when I started deconstructing and reading people's stories, like reading so many stories of women and the kinds of and seeing their videos on YouTube too. It was awkward for me to be asked that question and questions like it, but I was another man being questioned by a man.
Yeah, I was trying to imagine what that would be like for a woman, because the judicial committee or these higher ups, are they ever women, or is it always men?
No. And this was a huge thing in that aforementioned Australian Royal Commission. Jehovah's Witnesses are in court all around the world because they, they don't comply with child reporting laws and reporting child sexual abuse. They want to handle everything internally because that's how they handle everything. And so if they can get away with not reporting to the police, or they feel that they can, they don't. And so, why the fuck was I saying that?
They had you telling them every gory detail.
Women reporting
happened.
Yeah, and so all these courts are kind of holding them to account. There's a grand jury investigation happening in Pennsylvania right now. But when Australia did this, they asked a governing body member of Jehovah's Witnesses, Jeffrey Jackson, like, well, is there any room for women in this process? And he's like, no, because women can't be elders. And they're like, well, that's okay. Just not elders, but just in this process, just so, like, if it's a young woman or a girl who was, raped by somebody, can she talk to a woman instead of an elder who's a man? And basically no is the answer. Yeah. Because they feel that the Bible forbids women from holding positions of power like that. So yeah, it's very patriarchal. We haven't talked about that at all, but like women aren't allowed to have any kind of power or prominence in the organization. If you want to have, any kind of title, which they wouldn't call it, but if you want to achieve any kind of rank or move up the hierarchy, like you have to be a man or marry one. I
Wow.
guess.
At least in Scientology, women are allowed to rise up in the ranks. Like there's no women in Scientology C organization, I mean, are called sir if they're senior to you,
Right.
or mister even. But
Yeah,
yeah,
they don't have that for sure. Like there, you can do maybe more as a woman than you used to be able to, like in the in the 1800s. But like it's still not great. Yeah.
yeah. So when you go before this committee, like when you did in your situation, what then was the outcome? Did they give some type of penance or something that people need to do to maintain their good standing with the JWs?
Oh yeah, okay. So you would ask like what the various types of punishment were. So like for what I did, which was like criticizing the group on social media, like they were always gonna disfellowship me or kick me out, right? But that's not always what happens. Like if you are a repentant sinner,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so maybe you are just somebody who like fooled around with your boyfriend or girlfriend or something. You might just they might say, okay, you're going to be put on restrictions for a few months, and like you won't be allowed to comment at the meeting, because like the meetings are like very participatory. It's not like a church where you're just sitting and listening. There's a lot of like audience participation and stuff, but you might be forbidden from doing that for 2 months as your penance. Or there's if you're a man, like you are able to attain more privileges, which means like there are more things that can be taken away. Women can be pioneers. They can just do a lot of preaching if they want and like kind of get a special title. That's kind of like the door-to-door ministry, going out trying to make disciples. They might remove you from that. Like they might take away that position from you. There's also like you can be reproved, which is kind of like one notch below being removed. They'll at the end of the midweek meeting, they'll go up and they'll say, you know, Sister Smith has been reproved. And then everyone will be like, oh, she must have done something bad. I guess we need to look out for her.
Reproved?
Yeah, it's weird. It's basically like a verbal warning to everybody in the group that this person has sinned, and so you might need to watch out for them because it might rub off on you. But you're not shunned. Like you're not hard shunned. It's just like a social shame kind of thing. And then the announcement you get when you are actually removed is like, Brother Kreitz, me, like Brother so-and-so is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And they also don't say why. But that it would be a verbal signal to all Jehovah's Witnesses to shun that person. So like
do they announce this during a service? Like
yeah, they announce it. They announce it.
Newsletter?
Say that again.
Does it go in a newsletter, or they just announce it at the?
No, they just rely on the grapevine, just like the gossip mill, and it works. I mean, I've never heard of anything slipping through the cracks. It totally works. Everybody around the world knows to shun me specifically.
Yeah. But when you're being shunned, is it just completely no communication, no connection, no communication?
Yeah, for the most part. So there are allowances for blood relatives, but limited, right? So my parents, they're told that they are able to contact me for emergencies, for like family emergencies. So like I had an aunt who died. My dad called and told me. That's about it in terms of how often I hear from my parents. You know, that was probably back in April. I haven't heard from him since then. I haven't heard from my sister in 3 years.
Wow. So when you're being shunned, do they believe in Scientology when people disconnect?
Oh, that's true.
When they disconnect from their loved ones because they have to. In Scientology, they're told, well, when you put the proper label on somebody by labeling them a suppressive person, that you're actually leaving the door open just a little bit for them to come back, that there's always a path to come back. Is it the same thing?
Yeah, like the exact same language.
Wow.
It's that there's a path to come back. And they've got all sorts of things. They call it Jehovah's discipline. Like this is God's discipline from the Bible. And it's hard, but it's good because it's just them and Jehovah. It's just them and their relationship with God. He wants them to come back. It's loving. It will remind them, that they do miss the congregation. They just spin it as tough love. And sometimes, hey, the kid needs tough love. He needs to be shunned. And yeah, so they do everything in their power to make sure that people like my family feel like the victims of me. Like, they feel like, I can't believe that Jake has done this to this family. Like, how dare he do this? Like, when I just like, I don't want to shun them. I don't want to not be a part of their life. I just don't want to go to meetings anymore. I just think, the religion's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of, sorry. My acid reflux kicked in there for a second. But I was going to say, it turns out to be this vicious cycle because people speak out about the group because the group is hiding abuses to its members.
Just
if
like
they didn't do that, yeah, exactly. Like, if Scientology didn't label people as suppressive persons and go after former members and, like, isolate and manipulate people, if they didn't do all the bad stuff, there wouldn't be the need for like whistleblowers, and then there wouldn't be the need for the leadership to like silence critics, because there wouldn't be critics, because we wouldn't have criticisms. So like I kind of felt like I was in a situation where I had to speak up because I feel like I have a certain talent for it, and I do think that I feel a certain level of responsibility in being engaged in like preaching and proliferating a message that was false and actually damaging.
When you decided to leave, because that's a huge thing, especially when you're born into it and that shunning's coming if you speak your truth, what was going on where for you decided, no, I rather be able to live my life and speak my truth freely? Many people, that's a common question I get. Like, what was the last straw where you finally left Scientology? Because often it's kind of a false start multiple times because the stakes are so high, especially if you have a multi-generational family like I did and you did too in the JWs. How does that work?
Yeah. It definitely is a process of like, you realize, oh, this is going to happen. Like, if I do, and the only thing to do about this is to leave, and the consequences of leaving are definite. Like, there's no chance that is not going to happen. So you do just kind of have to slowly negotiate with yourself and like let yourself down easy. I definitely,
do they try to stop you from leaving?
Yes, I tried to keep it like close to the vest for a while in terms of like, I didn't want anyone to know, so I just pretended I was physically in but mentally out, PMO, as we say in the ex-JW community.
We call it being under the radar.
Yeah, so I was under the radar. That got to be a little too hard. So, I stepped down from my assignments as a ministerial servant, certainly like an elder's assistant. I think, there's a couple things. The final straw when it came to like feeling okay questioning the group was just realizing that I just couldn't handle their stance on LGBTQ issues. And I was just like, if this is how God feels, and I disagree with God. And I think once I realized that thought in my brain, I was like, well, then I should have full permission to question because I don't have anything left to lose. Mm-hmm. I think then once I realized it was a cult and I was going to have to leave, it took probably a little over a year of getting to the point where I'm like, well, not only am I going to start a YouTube channel, but I'm going to show my face and like definitely blow everything up. I think it was just like,
you did this while you were still married, which was prior to your wife leaving, right?
Right. Yeah. So that was, I would not recommend anybody do that. Don't do that.
How did that work? I mean, how did she, if you're comfortable sharing that, just how, I mean, that was a whole year in Scientology. It's like, boom, like that marriage would have broke up. Like that would have been it in the majority.
Yeah. Well, I kept it a secret. I kept it a secret, and so that was a problem because it's like I was cheating. I was living a double life. I was keeping a secret,
Mhm.
and that's another thing that I do think is hard about cults is that if you like, in order to have authentic conversations about your beliefs, you can't do that within the group because there are consequences. So that kind of puts you in a position where you have to be somewhat secretive.
Yeah.
But I definitely regret doing that. Like, I really wish that I hadn't done it. I think I was just in such a disoriented state that I felt like I needed to have some kind of outlet, some kind of creative outlet, some kind of diary, something.
Yeah.
And then, so of course, it was a huge strain when I finally showed my face and like everybody found out about it, including her at the same time.
Mhm.
And I don't know how we survived other than we just both realized that we love each other more than the religion. And
Yeah.
I think that, realizing the fact that it was supposed to be one or the other, or that we were supposed to love the religion more, is probably really key to both of us leaving. Um,
How did were her family JWs? How did leaving did so is she currently now being shunned by her family?
for the most part, a little bit less because
Mhm.
she is not as like posting online like I am to
Yeah.
that degree. But to be honest, I don't really know why. I don't know why they haven't gone after her. um, but I think it's just because like within the group, like I don't know, our congregation and my family certainly knows that she's bad association by their standards.
Is that what they call it, a bad association?
Bad association, yeah. She's
Scientology
bad association.
in Scientology, you would be a suppressive person and she would be a potential trouble source.
Oh my God, Christina, did you know that you're a potential trouble source? She likes it.
Yeah,
I think that's a good label for her.
it's very tough.
Um, yeah. So, boy, what were we talking about that led to all
Oh, yeah,
that? I think it
your
was,
wife being shunned by her family and how she found out. So obviously she had to have had doubts of her own or questions
yeah, her
along.
journey was, was quite different for mine in that, and everybody's is like obviously the fact that she had a husband who was like, I don't believe anymore, like that played some part in it. But for her, all of my issues of like, this doctrine doesn't make sense, or
Yeah.
this thing isn't like fair, she was like, well, that's like, this part of the religion isn't that important to me. Like, our attachments came from different places. I think
Mhm.
that you find that too, talking with ex-members, that everybody's attachment is a little bit different. And for some people, maybe it's more of the community and feeling that this community and these people, that's what's right and true. And for some people, it's like the doctrines themselves. It is like this system of beliefs. I think it was probably a bit more of the belief system in like feeling a part of the clockwork of the machinery that I liked. It was kind of satisfying in that way. And that was different for her. I think it was maybe more the personal relationships. And so I know for me, it was just more like slowly eroding over the course of years, before I realized like, oh no, I'm regularly doubting things. I didn't used to do that. I don't really know why that's happening.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense though, and it sounds very similar to the path that people take when they're questioning and then leaving Scientology. I'm going to grab some questions because there's so many of them.
Yes,
Don't get too
please.
far behind. Liz is asking, saying, "I have a no solicitation sign on my door. They still knock. What's the best thing to say to make the JW stop?"
No trespassing is better because they are specifically told to avoid those. The witnesses will be like, well, we're not soliciting, we're not selling anything, it's free. So
Yeah,
if you had a sign that said no Jehovah's Witnesses, that would definitely keep them away. Um, you could be like trolly with it and be like, I'm an apostate, and that like that would scare. But like if they come to your door, tell them I want to be like, I do not want witnesses to come to my door. Put me, like, mark me down as somebody not to call on, and they're supposed to write that down and make a note of it so it goes in a little database so that nobody knocks on your door. But a sign that just says no Jehovah's Witnesses, that would actually probably scare away the Jehovah's Witnesses.
well, there you go. There you go. Let's see. Oh, Don Glove says there's a YouTube creator that sells apostate signs to ward away JWs.
That's good. I should make that me. I should also be a YouTuber that sells apostate signs.
Throw it in your merch shop.
Absolutely.
Pause for Andrew is asking, Jake, you seem familiar. Were you on Cults to Consciousness?
Yes, I was. I probably had a beard and different glasses. Yeah. But yeah, and she was on my channel. And one of the channels took off and one of them not so much. And it's not important which one got bigger after that happened. But no.
We don't need to talk about that.
Yeah.
Nisa is asking, were there any kind of damages to your property? Any animals hurt if you had any? In other words, like in Scientology, they practice what's called fair game, where is if you're out there talking smack about Scientology or a critic, that they can pretty much do anything to stop you.
They don't go that far. Unless they stole my car, in which case, yes, then they did. But I don't think it was them, probably. I think that was probably just a normal car thief. They are, like, witnesses are encouraged to just avoid you at all costs. But they definitely will pursue you if you are not, like, officially disfellowshipped. If you just kind of try and fade away without going through their internal judicial process, the elders will stalk you. Like they'll figure out where you live and knock on your door and try to like give you a letter, like it's a subpoena. Like they will try and come after you that way a little bit. But that kind of like vindictive rumor spreading, not so much. The other thing that they'll try to do that they've been doing a lot lately is going after smaller PMO people, what we talked about earlier, like physically in, mentally out.
Tell me what PMO stands. Oh yeah, physically in, mentally out. PMO.
Right. So like there will be whistleblowers within the group, right? Like people who have some kind of maybe rank or privilege, and so they will leak stuff to whistleblowers, like myself and others who like will proliferate these leaked documents and internal videos that Watchtower doesn't want even its own normal members to see, right? You know, a lot of the things that ex-Jehovah's Witnesses cover that are leaked are, you know, just things like elders' letters, things that elders get every month, but I wasn't allowed to get every month as a Jehovah's Witness because I was not an elder. Like there, a lot of it, much like Scientology, the more up the ladder you get, the more access to information you get, and the more like kind of in the club you are. And so that really freaks out Watchtower leadership when people who are in the club start leaking information. And so they will maliciously try and go after those people to try and dox them and find their information and find their identity so that they can disfellowship them and make an example out of them. And they'll even use the legal system to do that. Yeah.
Use the legal system to find them or to stop them.
Yeah, to try and find the identity of the whistleblower, try and, you know, out them, and thereby stop them so that they're no longer supplying internal information to I guess what they consider...
Like if the person's doing it, they're under the radar or they're PMO, but they're leaking information out.
Yeah. Now, once a person is out, they usually do leave you alone. Now, like, YouTubers will get frivolous copyright claims, but YouTube's actually pretty good about taking the YouTuber side on it. But they did, I think it was just last week, I covered on a stream maybe, like if people wanted to go back and watch about it. But like probably the biggest like Watchtower whistleblower, kind of our Mike Rinder, Mark O'Donnell, is being sued by this collective of congregations in Pennsylvania. They're alleging that he reported on something that like broke privilege, that broke like attorney-client privilege. I don't know. They're like accusing him of wiretapping or something weird because he tuned into one of their Zoom meetings and they didn't like it. But, you know, he's an example of a really prominent critic who's actually successfully generated stories about them in the media and in documentaries that have come out about the group. So that's the first, and it's a very recent example of them going after one of their high-profile critics with the law, and in a way that strikes me as very Scientology-esque. But that's definitely a more modern shift from the group. They didn't used to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, they would just kind of, well, I guess the day and age right now with social media and having so many different digital platforms, they probably kind of had to catch up. So they'll find you, they'll track you down to disfellowship you, but they will not pursue you beyond that in terms of massive harassment. And what we typically see of, I mean,
Right.
I'll give you another example. Do the JWs have anything like our Office of Special Affairs? So in Scientology, the the dirty tricks branch that handles public relations but also hires the attorneys who follow people and harass and blah blah blah, it's called the Office of Special Affairs. They're C organization members, and that is what they do. So but it sounds like with the JWs, they once they disfellowship you, they're like whatever.
It's kind of unclear to me whether they do that or not, because they like they'll have, I don't know how organized and consistent it is. Like, to answer your question, yes, they kind of do have that. Like, they have a public information department that is definitely all about like putting their spin in the media. Like, they want positive stories about Jehovah's Witnesses, especially like in little local newspapers where you can essentially buy fluff pieces, and that will dominate the SEO like algorithm. And then the negative stories about child sexual abuse cover-ups are buried down beneath the 80 millionth AP article about Jehovah's Witnesses have a convention coming up in your area. Like, they want to bury that kind of stuff. They do have a weird blog that they make. They use a lot of the same kind of like think tank people that Scientology do. Cesner, I don't know if you're familiar with that group, Massimo Intravine, and there's like these kind of think tanks that work with the legal arm of like Scientology, and the Moonies and the Mormons and the Witnesses will work with these places. And like, if they're in court and they need an expert witness, some academic, they'll have these hack, fraud, fake academics write some article and kind of use their credentials to bolster an argument. And so they've got this website that kind of does that where like they're generating a bunch of articles about every single one of their court cases to dominate the media. It's called Bitter Winter for reasons I don't understand. But yeah, they use that to kind of like denigrate their critics and try and make their own cases look good and righteous and obviously morally correct. But they definitely don't do the petty vindictive stuff, unless a lot of the trolls in my comments are secretly people who work for Watchtower, and I just don't know.
Yeah, because in the former Scientology community, Scientology they've been doing this since the internet became a thing. And prior to that, they would send plants into groups that would meet, or they would try to infiltrate any type of groups where former members were gathering. But they'll come here on YouTube and just like get in the comments and try and stir trouble and go over here and go, this person said that about you over here. And then they go over there. Now, there are just regular internet trolls, but in our community, we have Scientology trolls, which take it next level, where they will go as far as to spread absolutely false rumors about somebody who's a former member if they're speaking out to discredit them. They've done this over and over and over again. It's been documented so many times. So it sounds like the Jehovah's Witnesses will stop just shy of that.
Yeah.
They're not going to hire PIs to follow you.
No, at least not yet. I think that would be actually really smart to do kind of like the Russian troll farm approach to like, I don't know, just sowing opposition. Would be a good idea.
I'll give them ideas.
But they should take some. No, I'm always trying to offer Jehovah's Witness leadership ideas on how they could be a more effective call. They don't take it. I would feel bad actually if they did. So it's good that they haven't. But
in the JWs, Jersey Jan has a question. Does the JW Church blame victims of crimes or assault? So in Scientology, it's fairly common, especially when it comes to any type of SA, that the victim is blamed. Like, what were you wearing? Were you looking at a certain way? And same thing in what you were saying earlier, they're not reported. They're discouraged or outright stopped. It is considered a suppressive act, which is a high crime in Scientology, to report another Scientologist to law enforcement. So how does it work with the JWs in terms of how do they deal with victims of crimes?
That it is similar. It is more cultural. Like we have a similar doctrine about not taking your brother to court. Now the church is not going to say, unless it's child, CSA, or unless they don't say that. They just say don't take your brother to court. Now, probably the leadership, if you were to ask them, would say, well, we didn't mean it like that. But that is definitely a thing in the group. They do that victim blamey thing. You can find some really upsetting old articles on their website that are very explicit in that. Like, be kind to your arists, be
what?
remember that they're a person too, that they're troubled. Yeah, like you can find some really horrifying things, and it's like, that stuff, even if it's not at the forefront of what they're promoting anymore, it's all still there. And all the longtime Jehovah's Witnesses who grew up with those doctrines are still around, and they have internalized all that stuff, and they're still really in charge. So it's part of the culture, all of that stuff of victim blaming. I think on an individual level, you would probably find Jehovah's Witnesses who would be more sympathetic and don't feel that way. But the policy of the group is definitely more like, if you're doing anything that might reflect poorly on the group, that's immediate suspicion on you.
Now, what does that mean, immediate suspicion on you? Just that they're going to kind of they got an eye on you now? They're going to keep an eye on you?
Yeah, like if you said, brother so-and-so, abused me, that might be an acceptable thing to say. But if you said, this organization has a problem with this sort of thing, well, that's suddenly a criticism of the group, and that would not be okay. And you would probably, then you are not just somebody who went through abuse, you would be somebody who's criticizing the group. And now the much more material way that this impacts victims of abuse is when it comes to CSA or any kind of sexual related crime or abuse. Well, they're a puritanical Christian religion where women are viewed as weaker vessels, right? So obviously they just kind of naturally blame women and see them as seductresses, and you are always hearing stories about Jezebel and Dinah and women who brought these things upon themselves. And then you also just, things that are abuse are sometimes just mistaken by the elders as infidelity or fornication. And so it has happened many, many times that a victim of abuse, a woman, is disfellowshipped essentially for fornication, as if she was a willing participant, when of course she wasn't. And then the abuse victim,
a woman who's a victim of a
woman who is a survivor of abuse, is shunned, is disfellowshipped, and probably that experience is going to make her very disillusioned with the group and maybe become an activist and try and change things. But that's going to get her labeled as an apostate. And meanwhile, the abuser has that path where they can come back, right? Because maybe the group is the only group that will take them in, because cults love taking in broken people who are desperate and have nowhere else to go. So it is much easier to be the abuser than the abuse survivor within Jehovah's Witnesses.
Do you have anything like in Scientology, like I was talking about the Sea organization, where, they sign a contract for 1 billion years, they're paid $47 a week, they're basically 24/7. When they're not sleeping, they're working or they're studying Scientology. Is there something like that in the JWs?
Yes, that is Bethel. And there are different Bethel facilities around the world. The main world headquarters one in New York is probably the Sea Org proper, you do sign a vow of poverty, and you get a stipend of maybe it's probably something like $70 a month. You know, you get and you go to like a little commissary that's at Bethel. But yeah, you live on this compound. It's 24/7. You're surrounded by other worshipers. That's where you eat, sleep, work, worship. It might be where you meet your spouse. And it is just entirely insulated
Do you have
in
to,
that building.
is it for a period of time? Do you sign a vow of poverty? But is there anything else, like in Scientology as a staff member, which they call religious volunteers, you have to sign a
Right.
2.5 or a 5-year contract. And if you don't finish it, they bill you for anything you did in Scientology, like
Oh,
back, even if it's on the job training.
I don't think they do that, but they do have you sign a contract. Like they will have people, they'll sign them in on a temporary basis. Like, all right, let's start with for 3 months. Okay, then we'll send you to 6 months, then a year. How about 2 years? So they'll do that kind of thing. And then there are people who just become full timers. They've been there for decades, and then that becomes a whole other thing because sometimes those people, just because of like organizational cutbacks and redundancies, like get removed, and then you've got somebody who's like in their 60s and has been a full-time Bethelite since they were 19 that has to get a job and insurance and stuff for the first time in their life because they've lived their entire adult life in a cult compound.
And
Yeah.
in poverty. Is there a Fuzzy
Yeah.
House has a question? Is there a city or town that the JWs have taken over, similar to Scientology's monopoly of Clearwater, Florida?
I didn't know that about Clearwater, Florida. I always think of like, Salt Lake City, Utah, or like Provo, I guess, like with Mormons.
Mhm.
I don't think so. I don't think that there is a JW town like that. Maybe there is, but I don't know. That would be a good goal for them.
Yeah, well, you're an apostate, so you don't get the newsletter anymore to know.
They don't know about all my great ideas. I think that's a great idea.
Some of them
Definitely.
are probably watching your channel.
Oh,
Here's-
Bethel is in Warwick, New York, for whatever that's where. It used to be
Okay.
downtown. It used to be like in Brooklyn. And then they sold the property to Jared Kushner like 5 years ago and made like $1 billion.
Annette has a question. Her sister-in-law is a JW, and she told us her daughter won't talk to her, but the daughter has left the church. So do you think that the sister-in-law is actually the one who cut contact?
Oh, that's interesting. It's definitely possible. I think it does become tricky, the question of like, am I shunning my parents to a degree? Because one thing that you definitely do realize is that I don't think I closed the loop on a thing we talked about earlier in terms of like, when did I feel comfortable leaving? I think it's when I realized that if I stayed, like every conversation I had with my family would be fake because all they talk about is Jehovah's Witness stuff. It dominates every conversation, as it's supposed to when you're in the group. So you have nothing to talk about. So like, I kind of understand, like on some level, no, I don't shun my parents, but what kind of a relationship would we have even? Because what do we have to talk about? And so there are definitely, and some people just have abusive JW family that, I talked to somebody on the channel a couple of weeks back. I did like a call-in show thing, and somebody, like, their dad was an elder, so was viewed by the congregation as like Mr. Spiritual, and their family was viewed as a spiritual family, but then he would go home and beat his kids and his wife, right? And there are arrests all the time of JW elders who were abusers. So it could be that your friend, doesn't talk to your JW, your friend's daughter doesn't talk to the JW family for reasons like that. Like, I would never say that there's no valid reason to ever cut someone out of your life. There is. I think the problem with cults is that it's systemic and mandatory.
Yeah. How many JWs do you think there are?
There are about 8.5 million. They're worldwide.
The Scientology says there's like 10 million members, and we know there's like 20, 30,000, and that's generous. I mean, that's about 8 million members.
I do suspect that they inflate the numbers, but they break everything down to a pretty granular level in terms of like their with reporting via each little region. They definitely inflate their numbers of like active members, but I think we weirdly haven't seen, because I've checked on this. I actually followed up on this at some point in 2023.
Mhm.
And I just tried to ask anybody who could possibly know, like, do we have like evidence that they're like significantly messing with their numbers in any way? And I couldn't find
Yeah.
any evidence of it. But yeah, when you think about it, though, it's not that good because like Mormons have way more people, and they are so similar to Jehovah's Witnesses, but just they are clearly set up to be a business in a way that Jehovah's Witnesses are not. Like, and even Scientology, I think, has the vestiges of being founded by one guy who didn't plan this out to be something that would last 100 years after he was dead, because he kind of didn't think he was going to die ever. Like, that's kind of the problem when your religion's founded by crazy people, you know, who maybe are a business genius, but they also kind of think they're immortal. Like Charles Hayes Russell was a business genius. He was a door-to-door salesman, like, from the time he was like 10 years old.
Mhm.
But he also was a crazy person who thought that math in the Bible told him what day he was going to go to heaven. So, like, I think like they're just not that good at business in some ways.
I get that. Scientology has a whole, they take L. Ron Hubbard's administrative technology, as they call it, that's used in running Scientology organizations, and they get Scientologists to apply it in their businesses and in their life. So they have consultants that are, it's just another
smart
way for Scientology to recruit. Is you'll have a lot of doctors like chiropractors and dentists who are really good at what they do, but they lack the administrative technology or the wherewithal to maybe run an office. So a Scientology business consultant comes in, ends up implementing things in their business. The doctor pays the consultant gives a cut to Scientology. And then as things get better, because usually you put in some type of organization, it's going to improve. So they try to handle one last thing or one thing for them. And then they end up going, oh, and there's so much more. It seems like you're having trouble with your marriage. And then they get them into Scientology.
That's so good. I mean, there are like definitely witnesses who will do that with their business, but witness a huge difference between witnesses and other high control groups that are in their, I don't know, bracket of like size and influence and stuff is like witnesses definitely discourage people from becoming rich and going to college and getting a fancy degree. Their entire model of control is based more on keeping its members poor and desperate and really reliant on the group. And they can bilk a few bucks out of poor people just as well as people who have expendable income.
When have that many members. Okay, I need to know about this. Can you show Natalie a bit of your impersonations?
No, I can't. I don't think any of them would be very good. I do a few impersonations of the governing body and like JW.org people, but they're all very specific references. That's not.
So you'd have to know those people.
It's like, like I do a good impression of Chris Martin from Coldplay, but nobody knows what that guy sounds like. So it's not that impressive. So, but we were just watching a documentary earlier. We were watching this documentary on John Williams, you know, the composer, and Chris Martin was in it. So maybe people have seen that.
Let me see if I can do. So Chris Martin from Coldplay, he's sort of got this like really nasally accent, and he's very like soft spoken. He talks about Gwyneth Paltrow, you know, and his children named Apple, and Moses and Jedediah. No, I don't know if that's the other one.
That's Chris Martin.
Really good. I would have thought that's how you spoke if I didn't hear it. So thank you, Bo Beats. We'll get more of those out of him.
That's good. Yeah, I got to think about other ones I can do. That's the only normal celebrity person. It's not very useful.
Let me grab these questions. Real for life. Will all JWs go to heaven? I've heard something about 144,000. What's that about?
This is how you know I dropped the ball in the explanation. That's so important. I didn't get into the heaven stuff at all. Okay, so this is another vestige of how, like, originally the Bible students taught that the end was coming in 1914, but then it didn't. So now 1914 is still a thing within the group, but it just means something else. Well, originally, the Bible students thought that when the Bible talked about 144,000 people being saved, that it meant them, that it meant the Bible students movement, and that all the acolytes of Pastor Russell were going to go to heaven, and that everybody else would inherit the paradise earth, right? That the paradise earth would just be all the other nations. But then the movement surpassed 144,000 members and it kept growing. And so they had to change it. And so now they have this thing that is really confusing, where there's 2 tiers of salvation. A very small number of Jehovah's Witnesses think that they will be one of the 144,000 people to go to heaven. And this is like 144,000 chosen ones from the time of Jesus' death to now, basically. So everybody born before Jesus doesn't go to heaven. They are going to be in paradise on earth when they're resurrected. Heaven started with, Jesus and the 12 apostles and that one guy who was next to him the night that he was killed. And then it just continues on to now. And so just very few people have been allowed in. And it's really weird because it's all like some internal mental process that you just know in your head that you're going to heaven. And so witnesses really don't know, like, it's really confusing. It's weird. Yeah. If somebody says that they're going to heaven, you're supposed to be like, okay, and not ask them any questions. But that is one thing about the governing body, is that they are all people who think that they're special enough to go to heaven.
It's kind of like in Scientology, is a person who's getting Scientology auditing can claim to be anybody in a past life, because Scientology believes in reincarnation.
Yes.
And you never another lifetime. And there's, often you hear rumors like there's so many people who claim to be Jesus, or it's always people who have some historical significance. And
yes,
it seems that, you don't have an exact version of that. So it must be kind of like that they're one of the 144,000.
That is so emotionally similar to what it is, though. Like, most people, if you were to hear them say, like, yeah, I'm related to Genghis Khan, you'd be like, okay, you are just full of yourself. But then there are some people who you're like, you know what? That guy might actually be a descendant of Genghis Khan. I don't know. Something about him. And for those people, I'm sure Scientology is like, wow, can you believe that this guy found out that he used to be related to Genghis Khan in a past life? Like, that is kind of the thing with anointing within Jehovah's Witnesses, where most people who say it, you're like, I think you're just full of yourself and kind of crazy. But there are some people who just seem like really smart Bible students, and they're just great people, and they claim to be of the anointed, and you're like, yeah, you know what? I believe it, because you're a great guy. You should go to heaven. Yeah. So it is like totally subjective in terms of like whether or not you believe that the anointed witness is going to go to heaven.
So the 144,000 go to heaven and the rest stay behind for heaven on earth, for the whole paradise.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. That's an interesting kind of random number.
They like help run the heaven government in the heaven department, and then the earth Jehovah's Witnesses will help run the earth from the earth department. And it's all very vague in terms of how it's going to work. But I've tried to figure it out a few times. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Diane Rostentrader says, hi, Natalie and Jake. XJW here. This is awesome. Love you both. Thank you for being here, Diane.
Yeah.
Let's see. Brianna says, my 2 favorite cult worlds collide.
Hooray. I'm so excited. Favorite cults. Mine's Mother God, for sure. I love that one.
Is that your favorite one?
I did love that documentary, and I reference it all the time on the channel. I don't know why.
That was a crazy story. For Weekend Warriors, is it true that JWs don't celebrate holidays? If so, why not?
Correct. They do not celebrate most major. Well, yeah, they don't celebrate any major holidays. They have different explanations for different ones. Most of it comes down to the fact that, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, all major holidays have pagan origins. Like, so they started as pagan rituals that then were co-opted and made a part of our Western tradition. but they have essentially satanic beginnings, so we shouldn't sully our hands with it. So, like, a lot of people know that Jesus he wasn't really born on December 25th. That is a thing that a lot of people know. Witnesses, like, that's why they don't celebrate Christmas, is because they're like, Jesus wasn't really born that day. That's just a pagan holiday that got co-opted to mean the date of Jesus' birth. And, like, they're not wrong in terms of history, but I know for me and my wife, like, now we don't believe in Jesus at all, but Christmas is just a nice holiday. It's just a tradition, and who cares? We're not worshiping Satan. It's just nice to have a tree in the house or whatever.
Yeah. No Halloween, Christmas, Easter, birthdays.
Right. And it's all kind of the same explanation of, like, the origins of the holiday itself are evil, therefore you shouldn't go near it. The one exception is, like, wedding anniversaries. You can celebrate that. Why? I don't know why.
It's so random. Nanamona, Jake, do you have to pay them money to get back in after a divorce? We were told that.
No, definitely not. No. I mean, it probably wouldn't hurt your chances. If you were like, hey, Watchtower, reinstate me. Here's $1 million. But no, definitely not.
Bo Beats has another question. I'm kind of known for asking uncomfortable questions. So, did the lawsuit between ex-JW creators ever happen? Were you part of it? I loved your video on the topic, but can't find it anymore.
Oh, yeah. Okay. This was actually, they're referring to this other ex-Jehovah's Witness YouTuber who kind of got, I guess you'd say, like, canceled a little bit online, and he got some criticism and got very annoyed at a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who criticized him and said that he was going to sue all of us and include us in litigation. I was one of them. I got some weird legal letter. It never went further than that. I do think it went further than that with other people, but then I also never heard anything. So I don't know. I just got a nasty letter from a Croatian legal team, and then I never heard anything again.
Cricket Cinema has a great question. Do they say JWs referring to themselves, or is it considered disrespectful?
They would mostly say witnesses. Like, that's how we would shorten it around here. You could say JWs. I don't think they would be mad. If you called them a Jehovah, they wouldn't like that, probably. Like, hey, you're one of those Jehovahs, right?
Yeah.
Like, that would be considered a little rude. They wouldn't be, like, upset, but it's not right. So witnesses.
Yeah.
But I talked about this on the Calls to Consciousness thing. I think that they've got a real branding issue. And see, I try and give them this advice because Mormons, like, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, such a mouthful.
So long.
Latter-day Saints, LDS, and Mormons, that's so many different words to say. With witnesses, it's really just Jehovah's Witnesses or witnesses. That's it. We need more words. They need to diversify their branding. That's what I'm saying.
How did it work? Because weren't oh my gosh, I'm going blank on
like
who played
Vanessa
tennis.
and Serena Williams.
Weren't they JWs?
Yeah, that was always weird. Like,
they played a sport.
They played tennis. Yes, I know. That's so confusing when you're a witness. We always heard that Prince and Michael Jackson were witnesses, and they were to some degree at various times in their life. And that was weird because it definitely is not like Scientology where it's like, hell yeah, we've got a celebrity. It's like, they're not doing it right. Like, they're not a real witness. Just instinctively, Prince is not out there living the witness lifestyle. I just know it. Like, and I loved Prince, still do, but I think there is a little bit of, like, side-eyeing as a witness because we're like, but I wouldn't be allowed to perform a concert. I would get in trouble. And so that kind of thing, like Serena is it Serena that's the witness now? Like, fully, like, really.
Both of them or one of them? I don't know. Yeah.
I know one of them, like, really came out and was like, I am retiring and redoubling my efforts to be a Jehovah's Witness. And I think that is probably an inspiring story for Jehovah's Witnesses because they like stories of people who come out of Satan's world and into the group and give up their passions. It's like they have.
Gosh, they sound like, I mean, are people in the and this could just be an assumption I'm making here. They sound like they're like, it's the more miserable you are, the better JW you are.
Yes, it's the Christian misery. Just like it's how wonderful it is to be a slave. Witnesses are that times a million. You know, I guess they're not. There are more extreme directions you could take it. Like, you know, Amish are kind of that in a certain way, but yeah, it definitely is. Like, all of the inspiring stories are about people, like the videos that they'll put on their websites. It'll be people who used to be an athlete and left that dream behind to be a Jehovah's Witness. And like, I used to be a great singer who had this incredible opportunity, but then I gave up that opportunity to be a witness. So it's just totally different from how Mormonism will be like, yeah, Brandon Flowers from The Killers, do a video for our website. So kids these days know that some cool people are also Mormons, and witnesses just like, they don't do that at all. I don't know why. It would be smart.
Same thing in Scientology. Scientology has they try to get celebrities to give legitimacy to the organization. This is a great question. Brianna says, can you talk about how they discourage education and certain jobs based on their usefulness in the new earth?
Yeah. So there's a really infamous video that they have now deleted from their website. I covered it a few months back, just this deleted video. And it's one of the governing body members saying, in the new system, in the new world, we will not need doctors and lawyers, but we will need carpenters and plumbers as we rebuild the earth after Armageddon, right? People aren't going to get sick in paradise. We're not going to have the U.S. legal system. We don't need that stuff. Now, behind the scenes, they actually do need those things and send letters to Body of Elders being like, we actually do need lawyers at Bethel, please. Yeah. But they, you know, that's not what they say to their members. So they are very clear about this. They have videos where they interview teenage JWs talking about, oh, it's tempting to go to college, but I just know I'm going to be happier if when I'm done with high school, I go into full-time pioneering, which is what they call getting, I don't know, 50 to 70 hours a month full-time in the field ministry, you know, pursuing organizational JW stuff full time. So they basically discourage it because they say this world is dying. So any education you get is going to be a waste. You know, maybe you can make things marginally better for a little bit in this system of things, but this system is doomed. So don't bother. You should invest in your spiritual future because that's what's going to last forever. And so, yeah, people who leave the organization are at a really big disadvantage. Like my wife is in school now. That was her first thing. She's like, I'm going back to school. I'm not a school person. I've definitely been thinking about it more, but you know, we don't have a lot of like ex-Jehovah's Witnesses in professional fields because we don't have a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses in professional fields. And that's kind of worked towards the silence around the group, I think, because we don't have people with, you know, who already have like a psychology practice, who is a Mormon and then is like, wait, oh no, I'm part of the problem. Well, now I can use this psychology practice for good. Or a physician who's a Jehovah's Witness and then can raise awareness about the blood thing. Like, that's definitely part of like that video that you were reacting to the other day of why I think the group is kind of seen as boring and there's not as much coverage about it, is because we're not able to like generate our own coverage authentically, like from that angle.
Yeah, you don't have like a Scientology media productions like they do.
Right. Yeah, no. And if you've ever seen the JW media productions, you know, I don't know if any of the video department who wake up, like, no offense, I don't know if there will be like enviable hires in Hollywood. I don't know, like I don't know how they can compete really.
Yeah. Bo Beats has another question here. Bo Beats must really watch your channel. The irony of you needing a blood transfusion shortly after leaving JW was quite timely and fortunate for you being alive now. Did you have any hesitation? Please answer in old news-timey voice. Bobby, I love you.
Talk about this incredibly personal thing in an old-timey news voice. Okay, so they're talking about the fact that I did need a blood transfusion like the week before I was going to be announced as disfellowshipped. Everything is scheduled, so there was a date where it was scheduled that it would be announced that I would be disfellowshipped. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was 8, and so that was just always I was always in and out of the hospital as a witness from the time I was a little kid. Had not needed a blood transfusion. Sorry about my camera, trying to get it to refocus here. But yeah, I had avoided surgery and avoided too much blood loss. But I was afraid of it as a kid. I was afraid that I would need to like make a stand for my faith and refuse blood and die. And luckily that never happened. It was obviously something that I questioned, and that led to me leaving the Witnesses, was just questioning this doctrine of just like, this doesn't make any sense. It's not really in the Bible.
Yeah.
The Bible writers couldn't have known about blood transfusions. Like, it's just different. It's different from eating blood. But it was more of a hypothetical in my life. And then as I started questioning and stuff, my Crohn's was also getting really bad around that time. Maybe the stress was adding to the symptoms. Yeah. But I ended up having all this horrible blood loss and ended up like passing out, like seizing. My wife had to call the squad. Like, I was taken by an ambulance to the hospital. They tried to do like a CT scan, but I was still just like bleeding constantly. Like, I crashed out, and they're like, yeah, we got to give you blood. We got to give you a blood transfusion. And there was no hesitation because I knew that I was dying. Like, I could feel like, oh my God, I'm dying right now. Like, oh my God, I can feel that I don't have enough blood in my body. I didn't know what that felt like until that happened. And so that's definitely, it was really important to experience that because it's a huge motivating factor of what I do. Just like realizing people in this group that have died because in their last moments, they realized, wait a minute, I don't want to die for this group, but it was too late for them. And they already signed the paperwork, and it was in their little no blood paperwork in their chart. And so it was too late because they were dying and incoherent and couldn't say anything. But there's not a lot of reporting on that in the news. Yeah. So the news reporter guy would say, I was going to try and jump into my news reporter guy. As you can see, it's not a great like topic to like mingle those two things, but yeah. I kept trying to find a good news timey voice, and I was like, this story is so depressing. What am I going to say? Wait, okay. My microphone's just like in a weird spot, and it's covering up chat. Let's see. I remember in nursing school, a JW in the hospital who was going to die because they wouldn't accept blood. Frowny face. Yeah. Sounds better with like the echoey, crackly newsman effect.
You need that background. Stretch is asking, thoughts on documentary Secrets of Polygamy, so similar to Scientology, disturbing regarding what they do with kids.
I haven't seen this. It's new, right? Is this a fairly new one?
I think
I feel like
I've not seen it either, but I need to add that to the queue for sure.
Yeah, I was about to say, I feel like I've seen this popped up. I have not seen that. There was one that was really similar to Jehovah's Witnesses called Keep Sweet and Obey.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that? Yeah. That group is very similar, just in terms of like their whole aesthetic and their belief system. That was another really similar group. But yeah, the polygamy thing, very different. There's definitely nothing like that at all in Jehovah's Witnesses. Wow. I don't know. Is there weird marriage stuff with Scientology?
What do you mean weird marriage?
like, well, multiple? I guess like the Mormon thing of, well, I mean, that would not be the modern LDS church, but like polygamy, like, is there any weird history of like marriage serves this function?
No, I mean, in the religion of Scientology, no. But L. Ron Hubbard had a very sketchy history when it comes to marriage, and there were reports of him being married to 2 women at the same time. But that never became part of the doctrine. That was very much covered up. In Scientology, they're very homophobic, regardless of what they say. L. Ron Hubbard was very specific about how he felt, what his thoughts were on homosexuals. Even though the modern day Scientology, they try to pretend like, oh no, but
Right, yeah.
no, you're not gonna. If you're two guys or two women, you're not gonna be getting married in a Scientology church, despite the fact that some of their people have said, oh yeah, no, we would totally marry a gay couple. Really, I'd like to see it because
Right, they'll just lie about it.
I've seen that happen. So yeah, they do lie about it. Let's me is asking, what makes it okay for some people to have professional jobs versus others?
Yeah, it's total BS.
It's just arbitrary. It sounds almost like similar to our celebrity culture. Like celebrities in Scientology or people with a lot of money who are big donors get treated differently than the everyday members. And the higher you go up, the worse the mistreatment, like from a staff member to a Sea organization member.
Yeah, sorry, my brain got distracted by a question in chat.
You go
help
ahead
me
and
out
ask
with
the question if you want.
Okay. Well, just because my brain died, I'm going to look at this question by Sandy McKenna, which was I allowed to do my impressions while I was at JW? And yeah, I would. My parents would have me do my little voices and stuff because I always, like, when I was a little kid, I wanted to, like, be a voice actor and do, like, cartoon voices. So I would do impressions of all the Looney Tunes. And I would do impressions of, like, the circuit overseers and elders and stuff that they're pretty good. You know, I was a fun hang in the field service group in between knocking on doors. I was fun. Do funny voices.
Brianna, and you don't have to be married to have sex in the Sea Org. Oh, you do. You do. In the Sea organization, everyday Scientologists can have premarital sex. Sea Org members cannot. You have to be married. You get in huge trouble. You get put in the prison.
What's the logic for that? Because that's what I find so interesting is how, like, it's always the same kind of machinery underneath. And, like, even you can get rid of the Bible and the cults will kind of end up on these similar sort of like traditionalist, conservative family structures and stuff.
I mean, in Scientology and the Sea organization, it in my opinion, I think it came out of back in the day. I've heard, like, back when there was the original ship that L. Ron Hubbard had in the Sea Org, there was a lot of hanky panky going on. And so part of a solution to that was, hey, you know, like, no, you have to be married. Now,
that's great.
In the Sea Org, there's nothing against getting divorced. There is no time to date. You can't really go anywhere. So people tend to get married very young in the Sea Org because if you're married, you can get a room versus living in a dorm. You get a room together. So, I mean, it's a lot. It was a big motivation when I got married at 17 in the Sea Org.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And then think about these young people or even older, and you can't have sex. You can't touch each other in any kind of way, really, without being married. So it leads to a lot of young marriages and multiple marriages. So it's just a mess.
That's very similar. My sister got married when she was 19, and that's not like the youngest age of a young married JW or anything. Like, that was totally normal. Nobody batted their eyes at that. Like, my mom and dad were 18 and 19 when they got married, and it happens a lot. Like, and another weird thing is sometimes the JW parents will be even like, yeah, a 16-year-old daughter, you can marry this 30-year-old elder. Just weird stuff like that will happen.
Yeah, in Scientology too, primarily in the Sea organization. In fact, there's currently a court case going on where a woman, when she was 16 and was SA'd by a man in the Sea organization, she was forced to marry him. And then they were married. I mean, it sounds very similar that way.
But you said you can get divorced too in the Sea Org without too many.
Yeah, easy.
That's amazing.
They don't date. They can't date, so they just marry.
Right. That's amazing. There's just like, listen, if you're gonna have sex, sign the paperwork first, and then you can just sign the divorce paperwork. But Just sign the paper.
Yeah, exactly. So many young underage marriages because of that. It's just really not a healthy environment when it comes to that. And then the complete and utter lack of any type of sex education. I mean, my sister, she was in the Sea Organization when she was 14. She got married at 18. She was 5 months pregnant before she knew she was pregnant. There's just was no, because she was in the Sea Organization at 14, there was nobody there to give her the talk or explain how her body works, or knew, of course, how babies were made, but not really. And there's a lot of that too, a
Right.
lack of an education about your body, and then all the sex shaming and stuff as well. Even in the Sea
Yeah.
Organization, if you're married in higher levels of the Scientology Sea Organization, you're pretty much stuck to missionary and, like no oral, like how they think they can even dictate those things. In the JWs, are there any like lines on, even if you're married, things you can or can't do in the bedroom?
Yeah, that's the video that I'm hoping to release by the end of this month is specifically on like JW sex laws, because they're interesting and they're a little confusing and they've changed over the years. Like that is one that they went back and forth over a lot, just whether or not oral and anal are okay within marriage. And they've recently, it intimated that it is okay but that's like in 2022, and they've gone back and forth for 100 years about that. So it's just so that's definitely a thing. It's a little cultural. Like they probably haven't written an article on it in a few decades at this point, but just culturally within the group, everybody knows like, well, yeah, you're not really supposed to do that. And there are old publications you can find that have it written down that you're not supposed to do that even when you're married. That was not the way. I just was always like, well, that's stupid. I don't care about that. And that's how my wife felt too. So it just didn't matter for us. But that was just, that's a weird thing that's like really impacted some like families and marriages, because people don't know if they're sexually compatible before they get married, because you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to, have any kind of sexual contact before marriage. You're not allowed to live together, and you're not allowed to date for too long, because that increases the risk that you're going to have premarital sex. So a lot of people don't communicate about this stuff at all before marriage, and then they get married when they're teenagers and realize that they're unhappy and don't have any compatibility with that person.
And not understand like the thing about being in the Sea Organization for like at such a young age as a teenager and then getting married. There's so much to learn about life. And there's so many things we learn. I know when I left Scientology and started doing more things out in the regular world, I've learned so many things in the last 15 years that I didn't know, even as an adult in Scientology. It's you're deprived in ways of certain life experiences that might maybe seem like a bad choice at the time, but that's how we learn, being a teenager and rebelling and pushing back. But when you're not allowed to do that, when you're so tightly controlled, it just seems like at some point, most people are just going to, blow a gasket and
Yeah. It's like it's been said that Jehovah's Witnesses are a sex cult. They're just an anti-sex cult. And it's like, there are cults where you have to have sex with the leader of the group or something. But Scientology and Witnesses aren't really like that. They still want to be able to regiment and control that aspect of your life a little bit. They just always want to have some tendril of the group controlling something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they really do. And it just creates such long-term negative effects in people. When you first left, is there anything that you did where, like that you weren't allowed to do or able to do, or was it just kind of a, going
anal sex? No. Yeah, that was the first thing I did.
Not allowed in the JWs.
That was the first thing I did when I left. No, that definitely had a lot of, I'm sorry, I don't know. There's a lot of things that I've been able to do that have been fun. Like, I don't know, this is kind of cringy, but like, I'm a big pot smoker now. We weren't allowed to drink, or we weren't allowed to smoke pot as
You're
witnesses?
amongst your people, my friend.
Okay, good. I
Very
thought maybe. I thought perhaps. I
Yeah, I
wasn't
just
sure.
give that vibe.
You do. It's very cozy. It's lovely, and so yeah, I started smoking pot, and honestly, it's been great. Like for my like digestive issues, and
Yeah.
I definitely started drinking way too much just with depression and stuff, and I've now definitely cut down on drinking. That's something I also did as a witness, so that wasn't new or exciting. I think the biggest thing that I've been able to do is like um, just pursue dreams that I've had without feeling guilt. Like I wanted to do YouTube from the time I first discovered what it was, but you're not allowed to do anything that like draws attention to yourself as a Jehovah's Witness. So like I wanted to do some kind of writing, entertaining comedy, something from the time I was a little kid, and I just wasn't able to. Anytime I would dip my toes in, you kind of feel that guilt and shame. I wanted to write novels too. That was my other thing. And so I've just been able to kind of pursue all that stuff since leaving, and to be able to kind of just work on craft that I really enjoy, and also just kind of let go of the constant cosmic guilt of thinking that you're just always being watched by either gods or demons, watching and seeing what you're doing and how you're messing up and how you're gonna not make it into Armageddon at the last second. Like that's a weight off that you don't realize you're carrying it around, and so you're able to let go of it. So I don't know, in terms of experiences, I'll tell you another one that I've got to experience recently that was really amazing was my wife graduated, got her associate's degree, and so I got to go to her graduation ceremony, and she's still continuing on, transferred to a new school and everything, but I had just never experienced like just real pride in somebody else's like secular accomplishment that was not, didn't have to do with the organization, didn't have to do with giving God glory or whatever that means. It just was, she's pursuing her passion. I've seen her work really hard, and now she's walking the stage of graduation. That was genuinely thrilling, just like a little joy of life. I didn't know I was missing out on being in a cult. So yeah,
that is so cool. Angels has a question. Weed helped your gut issues?
it did. Yeah, it helped a lot when I just had really bad. Sorry, I think I talked over you.
Oh, I think it's. Do you think it's because of the anti-inflammatory qualities that it can have? Because I've heard
think
that
so.
with other people with Crohn's who have that issue, they've had success using cannabis to help manage it, and then
Yes,
changing their diet and other things.
inflammation and nausea were the really bad things that were just, especially right before I got to the point where I needed surgery, just like felt like crap all the time, and definitely couldn't drink alcohol. That would make me feel sick.
Pause for
A little
Andrew.
bit of the can.
Congratulations to your wife.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, she's amazing. She's going to school for social work and crushing it. And so, and I'm doing whatever this is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love it.
Which is probably just as important.
Yeah, I mean,
In its
just
own
think
way.
about the amount of people who are probably out there. I mean, at least you have like 8 million potential Jehovah's Witnesses that might be doubting, especially younger generation who might be watching social media more and being able to get information about, you can leave and you can have a full life. That's a big motivator for me and my channel, is to be here and be able to show, hey, there's so much life to be had after a cult. You don't have to just be stuck there. You can leave
Yes.
and you can actually thrive.
Yep. And like, you didn't waste too much of your time. Like, you've got time left. That's why I was really, I probably got to go soon, but that's why I was really happy that you invited me on, is because when I look at your channel, like, it's super positive, and I know that for me, like, I weirdly have become a much more like optimistic person since leaving the cult because,
See why
you
it's not
know,
every day the world's gonna end.
I know you talk about like, oh wow, we have such amazing hope for the future, but that just means you're constantly like reaffirming how terrible the present is all the time,
Yeah.
and you know just how screwed mankind is. And
You
you know
don't-
now I feel pretty zen about. Well, I don't know. I sometimes existential dread and anxiety and spiraling, but not as much. So I'm trying to focus on the positivity more, and I appreciate that's the vibe of your channel.
Totally. I'm glad you made it. Stacy Toms is how I found out about you. She
Thanks,
sent
Stacey
me-
Toms.
She sent me an email with your information in your channel, and I watched the one video, and then we went from there. I just
Hey.
absolutely know we'll be able to do this again. I want to flash your channel again, you guys. Go over
Absolutely.
AltWorldly. You can find him right here on YouTube to follow Jake and hear more about the JWs and other cults as well. So I cannot thank you enough for coming on. We will absolutely do this again. Maybe I'll go over to your house next. It'll be
Please
fun.
do. Yes, that'd be great.
I would love to. Everybody in the chat, thank you so much for being here. Love it if you'd hit that like button. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, or you are, check that subscribe button anyways, because YouTube lives. Go ahead and check it out. And again, make sure you check out Jake's AltWorldly as well. So thank you, everybody. Jake, thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to chat with you again. I've already got 20 questions for next time.
Yes, thank you so much. I know I rambled. We'll definitely cover more next time. It was great.
That was fantastic. All right, everybody. I hope you get out tonight and have an amazing cult-free evening.